Good morning. Freich and Weimer. At the same time, we're all grieving and crying over these tragic events that happened in Iran last night. But the Rabbi, who we honor today, asked that instead of mourning and grieving over his own self, should celebrate. So may this learning of Chassidus Primus HaTeira be in honor of all those that were lost and their families and those that need our refuah shleima.
Amen.
So we're up to in Ayin Beis, Hemshech Ayin Beis, volume 2. We arrived at page 1200. Aleph Reish. And the Rebbe Rashab, in a very meticulous, step-by-step process, teaches us a step-by-step method, teaches us the process of how we move from being a yesh to becoming connected with, to the point of actually cleaving and yearning and aching to be encompassed in godliness. And he's using the word riyah, a seichel, that this is through a process of called hisbonenus, that one has to contemplate, because we are on our own naturally, because of the tzimtzum. Remember, the whole discussion is that tzimtzum creates a concealment of the divine. As a result, we have an independent existence and reality, but at the same time, on its own, the divine is concealed. Whether it's the ayin of the yesh hanivra, the divine that's concealed within existence, or is the divine that's concealed, the bli gvul of Elikus, the shamayim emal, the ir ha-bli gvul, which receded, and we're not aware and conscious of. Either way, it needs work, and that work is captured in the pasuk in Veschanon v'yadaita hayom v'hashavesel el levavecha ki havayu elikim b'shamayim emal v'ala oretz mitochas eined. That pasuk is a mitzvah. We're commanded, v'yadaita hayom, that today you shall know, and you shall feel, and you shall draw to your heart. Now what? That havayu elikim, that in the elikim of the tzimtzum, havai is really hu elikim, that there's a unity, the discovering the divine, ala oretz mitachas, we learned, was the ir hagvul, meaning the elikus that is mislabish, manifest within existence. And b'shamayim emal is the ir ha-bli gvul, the air that was receded, the air before the tzimtzum, that is without any limitations. And both of them, b'shamayim emal v'ha'aretz mitachas, and eined we learn later in volume 3. So in that discussion of that, v'yadaita hayom is the word das. That's why he explained das in the beginning of the subject matter. But now, after going back and forth and going back to Havayu Elikim and the two Havayu Elikims that were said by the time of Eliyahu and Har Carmel, where Vayirapeh es Mizbeach HaHorus, is Mizbeach Hashem HaHorus, that he healed the broken and the desecrated altar. So we're talking about refuah of what? As we'll soon see, the refuah of the chelis ava, that there is an element that was concealed. And at the same time, as we become aware of godliness, we begin to long for it, because really that's where we belong. So the tzimtzum concealed it. But our Aveda is reversing the process, and reversing the process from the bottom up, from a dark state, even more than a dark state, like even a state that may be unhealthy. Chela. Here he's still talking about chela sava on one level. We'll talk about this later, the different levels of the chela. But there's also, Chassidus talks about chela sava in a negative sense, where during Golus, we don't have Ava. So the chela sava is the lack of connection. This is going to be addressed, we'll address this later, but right now, for all practical purposes, he said that techachas musar, to transform the tzimtzum, to reach ir ha-bli gvul, you need to go through a darkened state. In this case, the darkened state is the eish shchera, which is the dark fire, yearning That's Eish Hey, yearning to connect to Eish Yud, which is Eish Levana, the white, the Bligvul fire. That is not subject to the Tzimtzum. It's concealed from us, but it stays intact. And the process of explaining that, the Rebbe Rashab went into this whole discussion that we've been learning in the last few pages of how the yearning translates into Avedis Hashem. And what is the Avedis Hashem? That is the Aveda during davening, where we are trying to reach a level of, like he said, a level of Rotzeh v'Tzimayin b'chinas chelas ava. A deep yearning and a thirst, which is a state of chelas ava. So how do you reach that? So it's through hisbananus, through contemplation, which begins with chachma. Chachma goes into bina, and then finally das, which will carry it into the midas, into emotions. So from das will come to levavecha, which is the heart. So in his bonus itself, you can understand something, but not necessarily in a form of riyah. So first he explained how in Oretz Mitachas you see the riyah begashmis, be'enei basar mamish, because you look at the universe, and when you look at it and then contemplate, what is this? This is the divine Koach Ein Sof that's actually manifest in the creation process and the perpetuation, the sustainability of the consistency of nature and all the celestial bodies and all those movements. Then there's his bonus in Yichudei law. This we don't have anything to hold on to, so it's all in our minds what we learn. But you can learn it in a way where you understand it and you stop there. You can learn in a way where it also resonates with what he calls riyah. So first we spoke about chachma and bina, that chachma is riyah, but it's a riyah that comes at the beginning of the process. In other words, when you have that flash, you sense something very powerful, but you can't say you fully understand it and fully have internalized it and fully have and comprehended it. So chachma then carries over into bina. We learned also bina originates in chachma, havein b'chachma, but then chachma carries over into bina where you begin to understand it. Chachma maintains and the integrity of bina, that it shouldn't wander off in all kinds of directions, because as it goes away from the etzem, and you're starting to understand it, it can go in every possible way. So chacham b'bina is that chachma is making sure and guiding and directing that bina should be kept focused on the nekuda, and to the point that it comes to nekudas atamsis, a summary that aligns the idea, aligns all the details to the original point of departure, the nekudas haskala, with mila of having now a deeper clarity because it came after understanding, while also appreciating that chachma still has something that bina doesn't have, which is that intensity, what he called reiv oyer, ribui oyer, and dakus oyer, the reichkeit, that you only really have in chachma, but chachma transfers over as much as possible to bina. And now we've come to that once you have the nekudas atamsis, after the contemplation, the lengthy contemplation, where you understand it well, but you also keep focused on the punchline, on the bottom line. Now das is basically a qualitative shift that you go now deeper, not into understanding, into applying it. So it calls hamokas hadas, where you come to a hakora hargosha, which primarily, besides also a much deeper connection to it, it's also a personal connection. Hiskashrus, what do you call das from hiskashrus? The idea now moves away from just an idea, it's now becoming personalized. And that itself, we've learned, is also have stages. Like with the stages. What are the stages? So the stages he said so far are the following. I'm summing up what we learned yesterday now and the day before. So he says, so das is the hamok in the nekudas atamsis, not just he understands it, but he recognizes it. It's I don't want to use the word resonance, overuse it, because I used it in chachma, used it but it is an element of also resonance, but it's a resonance now where you recognize it. In chachma, it's not I recognize it, because you don't really know it yet. It's just you sense a very powerful truth. In das, it's come after bina, so you've already understood this truth. You kept focused on the nekuda, which in this case is on the alakus, not just on the seder shtalshus or whatever it is that you're contemplating. And now comes this masikis in shemakir, shabon kudas that he doesn't understand. He mashemakir. In the parentheses, we learned that there's the hakara that also comes from etzma nefesh that's connected to that sheyesh etzma nefesh ba'atzma sein sof. However, that's still fundamentally there, and of course is critical. But the process of actually revealing that connection, that requires what he calls hakara sichlius. In other words, not just hakara because you recognize your parent, but one that you also appreciate and understand, hakara sichlius, which is still more than just purely understanding, because it's a recognition, the recognition of the matter that you are contemplating on. Okay. And then, so even though he used Riyah and Chochmah, but remember he said now that the Ikar Riyah, the Chochmah, is Ayidei HaMokas Hadas. So Chochmah is Riyah. That's the level it is. But the primary place where we experiencing the vision, that we can actually experience it like it's real to us as if you're seeing it, such a reality, and that's the word I would use right now. It's a reality for us. So the Riyah, so that comes through the Das, to the point that the Riyah who's by Ayin HaSeichel. So it's clearly still qualified by Ayin HaSeichel. He doesn't say V'rol kol basar yachdov, which means that not Einei basar, as the Rebbe emphasizes, but basar itself will see Elokus. That's the row in a row of flesh, of eyes of flesh, our flesh itself. Here he's talking about still Ayin HaSeichel, like he said in the previous page from the Rai Mehemna, that is the level of Ayin HaSeichel, the belibe is chazakula. It's still on a cognitive level, but it's as if you're seeing something that you love. So it's much different than just you understand its value. You see something that you connect with in a deep, intimate way. And then the Rebbe Rashab adds, I'm just really summing up what we learned just to keep the flow here. So level by level. Now, what's the next step? So, well, not the next step. Now he says, so how do you reach the Sriya Samus? How do you come to that? It's a very profound connection to something that's bligvul. Erein Sofa bligvul yichud elah. So he says, it comes through an effort, an exertion. Ribui hashkida, the ribui yigia, that when you make the effort, the concerted effort, and with much exertion, in any divine concept or divine idea, or divine, anything about the divine, like he says, Basaga Teva, Ubachol Eis, Basaga Teva, with a good understanding, Ubachol Eis, Ubal, the Kudus HaTamsis. And all the time, you're not just understanding it, you're constantly connecting it to the punchline, to the bottom line of the Kudus HaTamsis. Min ha-saga, and then v'tekeya daite bezeh. So not just enough is the understanding and even connecting it to the point of the summary point, which connects it to the point of chachma, but tekeya daite bezeh completely immerses himself with an intensity b'chezik ba'amokas adas ad shebol idei hakara, to the point that he comes to recognition. So das, hakara is not there in bina. He doesn't even say hakara in chachma. Hakara is in das, that recognition. He says now, with the matter in meshach zman, over time, he now brings another word, more than hakara, hisamtus. Now, even though I used before the word reality, because recognition means you recognize its relationship with you, the truth is here is where it comes now to a level where that it's true. It's absolutely real to you. That's where you can arrive at. Yisamtus, he says, now, okay, so now we've come from Hasaga Teva, the Kudus HaTamsis connecting to the Kudus HaSkola. You've come to now Das, which brought Hakara, and with time and effort and all that he just described, you could come Yachalove, to a state of that it's real for you. It's real. So it's not just personal, it's personal and real. That's what Das accomplishes. Okay. In reality itself, in his samtus itself, there's also two stages. You can have it's real. Your mind knows now it's a fact. Hisamtus zeis, you can say is hisamtus seichel. Herigish amitis adover. You sense that this is a true fact. After this whole process, you've come to it's a fact. It's no longer a theory. It's no longer an idea. It's a true reality. But what's reality? What's true? The idea is true. It could be hasaga hisamtus in haseichel. So he says now there's a deeper level. Hisamtus ha'inyan hainu ha'emes va'etzem shel ha'inyan. It's not just that it's a fact that God is great and Erab Ligvul is a powerful place. You could even come to the conclusion it would be great to experience it. But here, no, you're coming to the hisamtus that not just the idea is great in the mind, but the actual thing, elikus, is the hisamtus is in the elikus itself, the reality of godliness, not just the reality of the concept of godliness. And then he goes back, he goes back again and spells out the steps. Hisamtus haseichel is also greater than hakara. Hakara was das, and then you need work till it comes a reality like hisamtus. Even in seichel, that it becomes such a, not just you recognize it, but it becomes such a factual reality. That's also a gili harbi yesa gam hakara sayin. It's greater than just recognizing it in that personal way. You recognize it, not just you understand it. Okay, that's also a great level. And then he says, even more. The keshem shein edema, yediyah shein shadei hasoga, the yediyah shein shadei hakara. So now he's going backwards. Just like hakara, recognition, the understanding of something to the point that you recognize it is greater than the idea that just is from the hasaga, from the comprehension of it. You can understand it, but not necessarily recognize it. That's also great. So as I said yesterday, there's all these levels. Besides chachma and bina, in das itself, there's hakara in the hasaga of the thing. There's hakara. There's the idea through the understanding, and then there's the idea, the knowing that comes through hakara. So das, which comes to our recognition, is greater than the knowing that you have in bina, even though bina is a good understanding of it, and it even has an nekudas atamsis, the summary. Now you've come to recognition. Now comes in hakara itself, there comes now the level of hisamtus. Now comes deeper than recognition is the reality of it, the truth, the recognizing, the resonating truth and reality of this more than recognition is greater. You've come to this conclusion and resolution that this is absolutely true, is also gili harbi yesim hakara. Why? Because hakara is recognition, but now shezeu be'etzem hadover yesem. The recognizing the truth of it is more than just recognizing it. Okay, but then comes the final step. Hisamtus, not just in seichel, which is greater than recognition of das, which is greater than the hasaga and the knowledge and the idea that comes from bina into das. Now comes even greater, infinitely distant, higher than this, is the hisamtus ayin hainu emes shel hadover atzmei. So it's not just the resonating truth of the idea, the emeskeit from them inyan, that the inyan is a true thing. Godliness is real, not just the concept or the idea of godliness. That's where I believe we stopped here. Oh, well, we read a few more lines. I'm going to read here again because it's worthwhile reading. So I enumerated here all the steps. Now, of course, this should require more explanation in practical terms. What's really the difference between that great understanding of Bina to the point that you have come to the summary, which is so aligned with the idea? What Das adds in the context of recognition? What Hisamtus adds, Hisamtus HaSeichel, and then what Hisamtus HaDovar adds. So it'd be good to really take an example and go through steps of understanding. But I'd rather do that when we finish the subject here. So I want to see what else there is to unpack here. And then I'll try to take actual contemplation, maybe the one we spoke about, say the Shtalshlus, and say, okay, what is Chochmah in it? What's the Bina in it? What's the Das? And in Das itself, these stages that as we're climbing and getting more connected. And you probably can figure it out, but I think it'd be valuable to be able to spell it out. So I will do that, but let's finish the subject so then we can do that. So what does he say now? I know emes shel hadover atzmei, the emeskite from them inyan. See, he says just the language. Before he says isamtus hasechel hergish amitis hadover. Here he's saying the emeskite from them inyan. So there, when you say samtus hasechel, you sense the truth of it, but it's through the cognitive truth of it. It's like a fact. You come to, after a long analysis. I'm going to use a secular example. In all analysis of, let's say, a mathematical theory, or one of Einstein's great theories. So then people began to look into it. They studied it. And then there came a point of recognizing, you know what, this stands up as becoming a very true, still always a theory in science, but it's a truth that has been proven in a laboratory, has proven in studies. So you come to a truth of it, but it's a truth that's still not about the thing itself. It's the truth about the theory of it. Then he says, Hasamtus the Inyan. And he says, now spells it out. Vuhu, ha'anoche besichle. He says in Yiddish, I'll translate in English in a moment. The leg in seichel. Etzem ha'inyan aliki shelamayla harben bebchinas hakara. So hanocha besichle, we had translated the lake from seichel as being, for me, it's the easiest translation is resonance. It's like a hanocha besichle, that's a lake. When you say, when, let's say somebody says something and you study it and then you say, not just it sounds right, I sense the truth of it. And when I say sense, I don't mean it in a minimal sense, not like chokhmah where you sense it and you don't really understand it. Here it came after the whole process of understanding and summarizing. And now you've personalized it and you recognize it. So he says now there's this truth of it. He says, that there's a delay. Now, hanocha literally means, I use the word settled. It becomes so settled and integrated in you. That's really the broader explanation of what means here, hanocha b'sichli, delay from seichel. Now, remember earlier on page 1198, he used that same term on chokhmah. Now I'm thinking why the Reailty Rebbe took it out in Tafresh Pei Beis, maybe because of the confusion. Because if you look at the parentheses, he says, Hainu levad hanocha sichlis shenizbar le'il, about chokhmah. So he says there's also the element of seichel tefes sa'ir. Now he's using hanocha sichlis all the way at the end by das. Now the difference obviously is there, the hanocha is more you sense in the flash and intensity, the truth of it. Like sometimes you say, okay, I have a problem. You come up with a flash of an idea and you say, I got it. And someone will say, what do you got? And you can't really spell it out because it hasn't been developed. So that's like, I got it at the beginning of the process. Now it's, I got it at the end of the process. Very different place. Here, you have already a whole elaboration, a whole discussion. And Bina explored every possible way. You've come to the conclusion, which now says, you know what? Is that I got it that I had in the beginning by Chokhmah. Now I really understand what I got. And now you're coming to that. But Das adds the personalization, the recognition. And now all the way to the point of Hisamtus, not just that this idea that initially in Chokhmah I sensed was right. Many times, again, in secular world as well, scientists or other thinkers will tell you, I had a flash. I didn't know if I could prove it and if I could make a case. I then went through a rigorous process of Bina. Then I came to the conclusion, yes, that what I got was right. Now, there are many things that fall into our heads, like Chokhmah, that may not be right. But here we're talking about something that went through that rigorous test of analyzing it. You come now, and I got it. So he's saying now, in this higher level, that it's Hisamtus ha'inyan, which he said clearly is not just Hisamtus ha'seichel. Is the line, the words he used a little earlier. I'm just referring to the words because I want to make sure, like he says it, to stick to the words here, now to go wander off my own theories here. What does he mean by samtus ha'inyan? Ha'emes shel hadovrat, the emeskite from the inyan. I think on a very basic example, it could be, I mentioned this a number of times, you can come to a conclusion that something is excellent and beautiful, but there's something that still remains on the cognitive intellectual level. To combine the two, that I think actually three things here. Maybe this is the way I would explain it. Let me just, I'm stepping back. I want to start the paragraph anew. There are two, there's you, the contemplator, there's godliness. That's what he's talking about. But this is true about any seichel. There's the godliness. Now, godliness and you are initially, because of the tzimtzum, we don't just feel it, we need to work on it. And I'm talking now the higher level, Yichudei law, just to make it easier to discuss. Because Yichudei tata, sumar menechem, you could say I'm studying existence and I see the divine in the movements of the sun or the moon or the very fact that existence is here, yeshmai, which I'm not addressing now. So you're contemplating on something that initially you didn't know anything about. So it's not like you could just say me and Ein Sof Habligvul are comfortable with each other. I don't recognize it. I never met it. I never seen it. Even in Seichel. Now you're beginning to contemplate on it. You start with Chochmah, you go through Bina, and I'm not going to elaborate right now on that. I'm going to Das. You come now, after all of that this Elokus called Ein Sof Habligvul is a reality in the whole picture of things. And you really recognize it. You even identify with it, personalize it. So now what's happened is this process has bridged the Elokus and you. You recognize it as if something that belongs to you. Okay, but there's still another element. How true is it by you? You can say, I recognize it. You can also recognize your beloved. It doesn't mean necessarily you've come to the point that this is absolute truth and reality. It could be a subjective recognition. Subjective recognition. So now comes the next thing, there's a samtus. That this thing that I recognize and I've come to appreciate is very true and real. But there's one misstepping missing. Is that reality also personalized? Meaning, do you really relate to God himself, or you're relating to the idea that is so true about godliness? So this final step is that is a hanocha sichlis, what he's saying, the lake from seichel, etzem inyan halaki, that in the etzem inyan halaki, that godliness itself, the one I personalized, is real. So you have a combination of hakara and isamtus, but not just isamtus, intellectual isamtus, but a cognitive truth, but also a personal truth. Now, why do I say the word personal, even though he doesn't use the word? Because he's speaking about elokus versus the idea of elokus. So in other words, it's not just the idea, it's the elokus itself, and it's also hakara that you've recognized and recognized that relates to you. So there you have the ultimate both. Because you could also, like I say, you could have hakara without isamtus, you could have isamtus without hakara, in a way. You can know something is true, but doesn't mean you recognize it as if it's yours. You can know something, you can recognize something that's yours, but you don't necessarily recognize the truth of the thing. You recognize the truth of the idea. This is perhaps one way to explain it. I know it's somewhat subtle, but we need to find words to explain. So this, let's suffice for now. We're going to talk about it more, but I want to continue the flow here. And I'll stop for questions. If you have anything in your mind, don't worry. I recognize that. I just want to complete the picture here as much as I can. So he says like this now. He's something and whenever the Rebbe Rashab uses Yiddish, you could see it means that he doesn't feel that the Hebrew is going to fully capture the sentiment and the idea. So he says it in Yiddish, and he says it twice. As a matter of fact, now I'm thinking, you know what's going on here? Because seichel in general, as I discussed the example with Bertrand Russell, or academics in general, I don't have to be the thing I understand. I can appreciate theory in quantum mechanics or mathematics or in other sciences, and what has nothing to do with me. Yes, I enjoy it. There's something poetic about it. I also like the ego that I got from it if I am able to explain it or innovate it. But it's not me. I don't, I could teach mathematics. I'm not a triangle, as Russell said. Teda, no, you're learning about a lakus. You want to become one with a lakus. Lakus is not some mathematics. So in that sense, you could say, remember, he said that seichel itself is already his salmus. On page 1197, 1198, he said that as soon as you get to the potential bina within chachma, it's already a lower state, because truth and seichel, they can come together, but they don't have to come together. You can have a seichel and it's not necessarily true to you, meaning personal. So in a sense, seichel itself, you could argue seichel is great, but seichel can never be tefus. Less machshava tfisa beklal. No mind can contain godliness. So you could make the argument, you could understand some things, but as soon as you get to the etzem Ayin, the etzem Ayin is not a seichel thing. And yet das brings together both. It takes the seichel of chachma and bina, and as we learned in the back on page 1175 in the Beis Maimer, and it adds something that's not pure seichel. It's not pure mechanics of cognitive mechanics. It's coming now to a recognition that I identify with it. There's an I. Most people would say it comes to seichel, you shouldn't have an I. It's not subjective. Here it's still not subjective in the sense that you're biased, but you're taking the seichel and you're making it yours. It's my Father. It's my God. So in a sense, the samtus ha-seichel still is that the idea is great, but that last step of completely saying it's mine, and it's a truth, not just it's a subjective thing I connect to, but the godliness itself is true for me. That is a state where you're literally taking seichel and connecting it to something l'mayla ma-seichel. But not against seichel. Not talking about irrational. We're not irrational. We're not irrational. We're not talking about amunah faith. We're talking about in the world of seichel, like he said, das, on one hand, is something that's beyond seichel. On the other hand, it's still Chabad. It's part of the intellectual process. So it's a bridge, but it's interesting, a bridge between seichel and beyond seichel. The truth of something, recognizing a higher truth, which began in Chachma, because I said this explanation also in Chachma, but in Chachma it was not yours. In Chachma it was you sense something. Chachma is the first place where the superconscious and the higher reality of godliness enters into the world of intelligence altogether. Now we have to make it ours, because it's still beyond us. It's still a flash that can easily dissipate, as the Friedrich Rebbe said. So now we take it, turn it into Bina, which means I understand, I comprehend. You internalize it that way. Das now is the final steps. So the Nekudas HaTamtzis brings it back that in Seichel you have a connection to the first Nekuda of Chachma, but Das is the final bridge that really is going to bring it in becoming part of your life. Like he said, the Midas, Hashavesa Levavecha, sustainable, like he says in Tanya. His kasha is that the Midas now are not Dimyein Shav, but rather something that's becoming completely internalized within you, and to the point of a samtus, like he says in Elikus, not just in the cognitive, that it's a brilliant idea. There were people, the Rebbe Rashab would talk very harshly about maskilim who learn Chassidus and understand it well, but it's completely not about me. He said, no, Veda, it's a great theory. These ideas in Chassidus are very powerful, but is it affecting you? Is it connecting to you? Yes, it resonates like listening to a song or poetry. Beautiful. It's all beautiful. But the question is, how internalized is it? How does it become yours, that you act on it to the point that it changes your life? And he was very upset. We talked very strongly about people who, the scholar of Chassidus without the Aveda. So das, now, so he says like this, which is much higher than Akara recognition, because you come to a truth in the Etzem Min Eliki, Shezel al Kaponim Tfisa B'Seichel. Because Akara is al Kaponim, I think he's talking about Akara. Yeah. Because Akara recognition is al Kaponim, it's Taka recognition, but it's a recognition that Tfisa B'Seichel, that the Seichel can grasp. So Hakara is more than just hasaga. It's more than just understanding something. It's a recognition of it, but it's still a recognition in the world of comprehension. That's what he says now. So hakara is higher. He says, it's not understanding the idea, recognizing. But veisamtus goes further. He hanoche b'seichel mashalamayla min haseichel legamri. Okay, so now he's adding, hakara is a bridge between seichel and now there's a recognition, something a little more. But isamtus is hanoche b'seichel. That in seichel it becomes very true. The seichel accepts as a fact that what? Something that's completely higher than seichel. Es legt sich up in seichel, Yiddish again, das was is hecher wie der seichel. Ukeila roye mamish be'ena v'sa'in eliki. That in seichel you suddenly have the two opposites. Seichel, which is so often a cold, detached analysis, a cognitive process, which you don't identify with necessarily the idea that seichel is relating to something higher than seichel. He says no. Right? This level of das is coming. You don't just recognize it. You don't just recognize it. It's a seicheldika truth. It's as true to you as 2 + 2 = 4. But what's true? Not an empirical reality, a divine reality. So seichel lekt sich up, that which is higher than seichel, and as if he sees it mamish with his eyes, as if, remember, it's not physical eyes as long as Mashiach doesn't come yet. Mashiach hasn't come. It's mamish, like mamish seeing it. It's a inyan aliki. The inyan aliki, not the seichel aliki. The inyan aliki. She'ein ha-seichel b'chinas keli lezeh. Seichel itself is not a keli. If someone went purely with a type of the cognitive rules of intelligence, it would not be a keli. Because seichel is very much about mechanics. It's about analysis, evaluation, determining algorithms, formulas, and so on. So it's only felt in the seichel. So this highest level of das, is samtus, of the inyan, is that it feels, the seichel feels the truth of it. Oh, that's a new introduction of a new concept here. The seichel is more like a keli poshet, not like a klei hamakabel. What's the difference? A klei hamakabel is shaped like a cup to receive. Well, first let me translate. He's a keli poshet, a seamless container, a shapeless container almost, as opposed to a klei hamakabel, to a container that receives. When you make, let's say, a kos, it has to be shaped a certain way. If it was poshet, it wouldn't contain wine in it. So a klei makabel, or a student has to focus, align himself to his teacher, and receives. A klei poshet is more something just passing through. It's not really a keli that can contain it. The student understands the teacher. But the klei poshet here, seichel, is in the sense like, I've given the example with chachma, but I'll use it here. Where you're coming to point, it's not I understand it, but it's completely true to me. In your seichel too. It's not like your seichel has come to conclusion that there's a reality greater than seichel. And seichel actually identifies with it. It's not like seichel is surrendering to amunah, to faith. You know what, I don't understand, but I believe. That's not what he's saying here. Seichel itself, after this long process of chachma, bina, and das, and all the levels, seichel itself is saying, it's real for me, just like the seichel that I have about things that I fully understand. This reality of elokus that's higher than seichel is real and true to me. So it's hakara, deeper than that. There's samtus, even more than just recognition. So it's a keli pashat. Ki etzem ha'inyan hu, because the etzem inyan of this is who the samtus. Ki etzem inyan hazeh, the samtus. Sorry, hazeh. Because the etzemin of etzemin hazed the samtus, the very core essence of something that is resonating reality, a truth and a reality, hulamayla ma seichel, is higher than seichel. If someone says to you, how are you so, I think a good word here is also conviction. How are you so, I don't mean conviction as in, how are you so convinced this is true? Someone will say to you, how are you convinced that God is true? I have many reasons and to argue with you that God doesn't exist. I'm just throwing that out as an example. Or other truths. Now, we're not talking about faith again. We're talking about because I've gone through a process and something is so true to me, I can't explain to you exactly why it's true, but it's my seichel completely comfortable with the truth of this reality. So that's what he says here. Again, Yiddish, for the fourth time. Es herzich in seichel. Es herzich means like seichel, it rings true in seichel. It resonates in seichel. So it's like we spoke about that the seichel resonates with a higher truth of something that's not purely defined by the laws of logic. And this is a very profound, or very internal, I should say. Hanocha pnimis means it's not just superficial recognition, a superficial resonance. It's hanocha pnimius ma'id. It's extremely true and real to you. The seichel u'benefesh, in seichel and in the spirit and the soul of the person. Let me read till the end, and I'm going to then hear what you have to say. Okay, so we come here to a point where you see the human being, which is the intelligent human being. And again, he's not talking about surrendering your faculties and just submitting like an Evet Pasha to God. He's talking about you're using your Chabad. So the seichel of the person, so much that defines us, is now become a Keli Pashat to be able to sense a truth and reality that's beyond us. Which in fact is really what intelligence is, to be honest. If we were just emotional creatures, we'd be driven by our whims and our impulses and our reflexes. I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, I'm attracted to this, that. What does seichel do? Besides creating a disciplined human being and someone that is focused and moyach shalat alalev and self-control, but there's something else. Seichel can dream, it can imagine. Midas is all about what's going on in my life now. Seichel, you can dream about lifnei tzimtzum. You can dream about many aspirations. And I don't mean dream as in the word dream. I mean, your mind is able to travel to places that are beyond the here and now. The true nature of seichel, as we learned, is really God's tool, l'mayla lamata, that he took something that was completely beyond intelligence, elokus itself, and said, I'm going to channel it, and I'm going to allow it to flow through seichel, the seichel I've given the human being. But that seichel is coming from a higher place. The conscious, chachma bina das, comes from the superconscious, chachma stima, within Kesser, which comes from even higher levels. The thing is, we work our way from the bottom up, so we can stop at seichel and say, I'm not going higher. My seichel stops only when I have empirical, natural proof, scientific proof. But if you really allow yourself to broaden your horizons, seichel can channel in things that are realities that are higher than seichel, but seichel can relate to it and feel it and sense it. So now you have where seichel has become, even though on its own it can be a ma'ilum mastir, it can stop a rational person from going higher. But when you go with this process, chachma bina das, you've come to this resonating truth that it's real to you, just like your hand is real. So now, once you have this fusion, so now that Rebbe Rashab concludes going back, so this is why it's going to bring a tremendous thirst and yearning. If you didn't have this, it would be a cognitive idea. It's a great idea, and I go to sleep. It doesn't have to affect me personally and emotionally. But now he says, like you said, that was born out of this deep connection and personal connection. So it's both internalized in you. It's also about God himself. So of course you want to be part of it. So he says, now the Eitzemat Shukavat Semen Alin Yaliki Yave Lidei Cheli Mamish. That's why you become sick over it. You'd never become sick if it was just an intellectual process. You become sick of it because it's so connected to you. It resonates the truth, and it's the elokus itself. So you come to Cheli Mamish Meheder Haizgalus, the Heder Haravas Simene Haneira. from the lack of the revelation of it, because now you're connected so much to it, but you don't have it. It's not something that you're experiencing. You're just completely connected with it. You fell in love with it. Let's put it that way. And your mind is in love with it. So now it creates literally love sickness, a cheli mamish, from the lack of revelation and from the lack of the quenched, from the lack of the thirst being quenched, hanera, the awesome thirst, not being the unquenched awesome thirst, and the lack of revelation causes cheli mamish. Who amitis in chelas ava. This is the true level of chelas ava, love sickness. Habab mebchinas riya dafke. Like you said on the top of page 1197, that it comes dafke through riya. Riya here means a samtus, that is completely real to you, like as if you're seeing it. Asher harafu amitis. Now the true healing of this, tiya la'asid, will be in the future la'asid love. Sheyeh b'chinas riya samachuz bizgalus mamish. So the true complete healing of this will be.
I think you skipped a line.
Oh, you're right. Okay, sorry. Yeah. Because the soul is not sated and not satisfied, and its thirst is not quenched. There's no revelation that's going to quench the thirst and satisfy the nefesh. Because once you've seen it, I want this. I don't want a reflection of it. I don't want a story. I don't want a photocopy. I want the thing itself. Now, the true healing of this will be la'asid. Then we will be united and actually completely connected with these levels of divine. You just won't have only the ratzeh. It'll come into ashuv, which means it'll come completely part of who you are. Not the recognition of it and not the samtus of it. That already you recognize, but the actual experience of the elikuz that has become now so close and beloved by you. Okay. I know I didn't pause because I wanted to complete the subject till the end here, even though we could have stopped by Eitzim Atshuka, but might as well have finished and rounded it out. Now, the floor is yours if you want to ask anything. I think I explained it pretty well, if I may say so, but maybe not. But you may have other questions. So please, anybody wants to ask anything or comment, go ahead.
It was a great exposition. I take many things out of it. One thing I took out of it is that here we see, if we take a step back, first we were talking about Chachma Bin and Das, and almost so much that it was exclusive of the bigger picture. But once you go through all this, it seems as though mochin is being, the sechel is being used as a tool to get to the re'iyah, to get to the chelas ava. So therefore, it doesn't end with das. All of sechel, chachma bin and das is used as an instrumentality to bring to make this personal, to make the emes become so clear to you, to become a part of you, so that you can relate to it as a personal matter. It's not the end in itself to understand it. It's used as an instrumentality so you can access that, the godliness, and then it's something so real to you that I guess your own persona takes over and sees it, understands it, and longs for it, is sick for it. Is that a fair summary?
Yes. Okay. I mean, there's more to it, obviously, but that's definitely one of the aspects of it. I mean, only qualification I'd make maybe is that there is an inyan that seichel itself should unite with that which is higher than seichel. This also has another achievement. It's not just, obviously the key is that it transforms you as a person, and in the deepest way, like v'shavesa levavecha. He didn't really speak about midas yet, but there's also a tremendous achievement here, because Chabad becomes, besides the instrument, it also becomes united with godliness, which is a very beautiful concept, not just through faith. Anyway, I just wanted to throw that.
Rabbi Jacobson, two things. One was the You use a term today that I don't know if I've heard that before. Subjective hisamtus, I think you said subjective. And I was wondering whether that, I'm thinking about like Einstein's theories. So he has these theories. By him, it's like true. Then he's amtus Inyan, not even the Hasagai Inyan. People also reviewed his theoretical work, and they also believed it was true. He's amtus Inyan, but they still haven't had empirical truth. And I'm wondering if there's a difference between his subjective hisamtus, that by me, it's reality, versus is there a further deeper level where not only by me, but by the Welt, elokus is be'emes, is vegan.
Very good question. I'll answer. Yeah, I hear the question very clearly. Yeah. When it comes to Amunah, there you rely on maminim b'nei maminim, somebody faith you have within you. So maybe the only thing to bring it to the world is to reveal it in people. They may not know they have Amunah. But I think one of the beautiful things here is, since he's not using them, is seichel. I think let's take the Einstein example. Einstein was sitting as a post in his whatever he was doing there in a post office.
The post office.
And he was ruminating. Some say precisely because he didn't go to the regular institutions, he thought out of the box. He didn't think with the regular rules, which is usually what geniuses do. Okay, he comes, recognizes something. I'm sure he had epiphanies, that was like a chokhmah epiphany, and he didn't have yet proof for it. As a matter of fact, we know that he actually came up with theories that later he himself rejected, and then later he accepted again. So, not getting into now how these epiphanies come, but this epiphany, and it's good. Then he developed it into a theory that now has to be tested. Mm-hmm. So now let's say another physicist reads Einstein's theory of relativity or special theory of relativity. And he says, okay, interesting. But remember, the second guy didn't have the epiphany. He didn't have that flash of resonating truth. He studies it, Mamata Lamaila. He's trying to understand. But you know what? You read from physicists who, after reading it again and again, and first many of them rejected it also initially because it goes against the grain of Newtonian physics or previous physics. And then they say, 1 second, there's more here that meets the eye. And some of them came to the epiphany the other way around. After studying it, they came and said, you know what? There's something true here. And there are physicists that talk about the excitement almost as if they were Einstein himself. Now, so I would use that example that I think using seichel properly, you can communicate to people who may not right now feel that resonating truth, but we're learning it properly and appreciating even the Chachma Bina, I'm not even getting into Das yet, can lead them to a place where you could start saying, you know what, let's take it to the next level. And that the seichel could actually, not because they were persuaded by a mathematical empirical proof, the seichel lead somebody to a point where they can appreciate something that's beyond seichel. I personally have experiences. First of all, myself. Second of all, in teaching. I teach people who initially rejected the whole thing. This mumbo jumbo, religion, and smart guys who would say, okay, you found these like psychobabble language to justify your irrational truths. But some were open, many were open, started studying, and I know people by name that through seichel, meaning seichel, I don't mean seichel purely the seichel theory, but I mean the whole, the idea, the eloquence of it, and then began to resonate. And now they will tell you that it was Chabad, Chachma Bina Das, that brought them to these higher truths. Now, yes, you can come. You could also come to it, frankly, yes, some people came, they saw the Rebbe, a flash of lightning. Some people had a moment of crisis and trauma. That brought it to them. I'm not denying that there are other ways, but I've seen, and I could completely explain that you could use this to come to a point of that level. But a person obviously has to be open to it. If someone's not going to study Chassidus, or at least not be receptive, or not be study but not be receptive, obviously that's like someone doesn't want to hear the story. But so that's my answer to you. So I think it could be brought to the world. Chassidus could be brought to the world, definitely. Not only the ideas, but also the psychological application, the brilliance, even this itself. I remember at least 20 years ago, I was at a wedding in Minnesota, even earlier than that. And there was a creative writer there. He was from Hollywood. And this guy, he came over to me. He says that someone told him that I can teach him methods of how to open up his creative channels from the superconscious to the conscious, basically from Chachmas Tima to Chachma Gluya. So I said to him, how do you do it till now? He said, well, I take some psychedelics. I do some other methods that I have that I try to open up those channels. So we spoke. I told him, you have to start learning Chassidus. I told him, what's Chassidus? I told him, Chassidus is a bridge where Seichel meets beyond Seichel. So he was intrigued and began studying. Today he's a Shomer Shabbos Jew. And I'm not taking credit for his frumkeit or something. I mean to say, what intrigued him was the process. So, I could see teaching this alone, this subject itself, I could see people with openness. They have to be open. Obviously, if a person is not going to listen, then, so that's my response. I hope I responded to your question. I think that was your question, right?
I was really actually going the next step, meaning that Einstein, somebody else besides Einstein could learn it, and then eventually he could come to that level of almost epiphany that's so clear by him. It's subjective truth by him. But I'm trying to say, whether you use the term today, subjective truth, I want to know is when they finally proved empirically the theory of Einstein, not just for these few guys that got it, but for the world, where it was front page news on the New York Times, that there was an eclipse of the moon and the sun that proved the speed of light in his theory of relativity.
Okay, good.
So I wanted to ask you whether if the Rebbe's going to bring that, is that only going to be available in Lasid Lavo, that level of Malayars, the Hashem, and that kind of empirical where everybody accepts it, a truth that everybody accepts, not just subjective truth.
But you know what? But let me tell you something, Eliezer.
Yeah.
I think most people who don't even know what the theory of relativity is accept it for a different reason. Because if you tell me my smartphone works and it's based on the theory of relativity, I don't really care what the theory is. It's working, and that's all it's helping my life. I think, once it becomes a headline, it's not just because there's empirical proof. There's also a certain becomes conventional wisdom, even though most people can't even explain how a vaccine works or how an aspirin or a Advil works or something. So just keep that in mind. That's not all purely seichel, exactly. But let's, for argument's sake, those barei seichel who need to see like you said, the eclipse, they need to see it. First of all, as you probably know, even seeing that, there are still detractors who have other theories. Right now, Einstein's theory, they'll say, is the majority have accepted it. There's always a detractor because there's no such thing as absolute proof, period. Meaning, at the end of the day, you have theories, you prove them by testing them, and it becomes part of scientific fact. But we all know that things can change, not that the fact, well, maybe other ways to explain it, et cetera, et cetera. So I just wanted to qualify. It's not this like science has some monopoly on absolute truth, exactly. The second thing is, what exactly is truth? Is truth something, yes, a scientist will say, if I can't prove it in a laboratory, it's not true. We won't say that. There are many truths I can't prove in a laboratory. Can you prove the love of your child in a laboratory? Can you prove that you cry and grieve when your father passes away, God forbid? I mean, yes, you could say chemicals within you. In other words, the very word, what truth means, has to be really analyzed properly. I don't want to get to the point where I'm saying truth is whatever anyone says is truth. My subjective truth makes it truth. No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying the word truth, I don't know, is only purely, like, let's say you talk about la'asid love. La'asid love, I think they'll be deeper than an empirical proof. It'll be experiential. It'll be like if I go outside right now and I feel the sun is shining and making me warm, I don't need a scientific theory to tell me that. The theory will explain why, but the truth, I know already. So I think la'asid love will be riyas and mahus means you experience, it's like as real to you. You want to go then prove it? Fine. Will we need it? I don't think most people who experience it on that level won't necessarily need a proof. But I would say the following, the other way around. Using seichel, you can actually come to these type of conclusions. So I hear what you're saying. At the end of the day, I think there must be a distinction between godly truth and a scientific truth for many obvious reasons. Besides the absolute and the relative, and one is a creation, one is the creator. I also think that we're talking here a reality that's far more than just a laboratory proof. Because let me say this.
It's amtus.
Oh,
That is amtus.
Oh, but anyway, but point being is, yeah, there's a lot to say on this, and it's good you brought it up. I have more to say on the topic. I think it really comes down to analyzing what the word truth is. When do you use seichel? When do you use other tools, and so on? I think in the context of what we're saying here, it's very clear that seichel can lead you to levels of isamtus, like he says, of truths that are beyond the initial parameters of the regular logical process.
It's a different kind of a seichel. This is a transformation of the seichel, which is seichel, like the Rabbi said.
Let me ask. Let me ask you something in return, Eliezer. I know the theory of relativity doesn't have any moral implications, but let's say it did. Let's say the theory of relativity has some moral implications. And then you go and you meet Einstein and you meet all the others that had the epiphany. You meet those that saw the eclipse, that have proof, and they behave completely inconsistent with whatever their proofs are. What would you say about that? What are they lacking?
I would say they're probably living by the theory of that everything's relative. So
that's good. That's good. But I'm saying, then you, one second.
Yeah.
Well, let me first finish. Then you see somebody who is morally completely impeccable, but he doesn't understand all these theories. My point is, from a Torah point of view, truth is not just what you know and what you can prove, it's also who you are and how you live. Now, I know scientists hate that statement. They say, no, we are observing reality. It's like watching something behind a glass, has nothing to do with me. And they actually deify that I'm detached. That's what objectivity is, detachment. You can't let me, if I become biased. I remember a scientist once telling me, I can't learn Chassidus, he told me, because it's very compelling and it's going to prejudice me. You hear that?
Yeah.
So I say, why? Because it may make you into a mensch. So you're going to get,
Right.
In other words, yeah.
Well, I've got a question here. All of this was to bring us to Choilis Ahava, which is not the same thing as having the I think you used the word yud, the unification or the sort of coming together with Elokus. It's just to say we understand what it is and we're lovesick for it. We want it. We want to strive for it, but it's not to say we are there. And so my question
he says the healing comes also love it. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So my question comes now at a personal level. So we've talked generally here in a cosmic level, although you have talked about personalizing him, but you're talking about seeing something. It's so real, but it's still it's a metaphysical cosmic truth. It's not what I want to do. My question comes to the personal. We know that Elokus, each of us has a spark, the Yechida, there's an aspect of the Orein Sof, at least a tiny bit of it inside our neshama. That's what gives us chayas. So if it's true that we can reach this state of lovesickness, and I recognize it takes a lot of avoida. I'm not saying, even if I understand what you said today in the lecture, it doesn't mean I have das. But let's say I get there, and I turn it on myself, and I want to connect, and I turn it internally, reflexively, and want to connect with the godliness within myself. It seems like until la silavo, you're setting yourself up for misery, frankly, cosmically and personally, because you can't do it. So you're finding the truth. Okay, wonderful, but then you're also finding the alienation. Like, I'm never gonna be able to fully connect with my yechida. I know it's there.
Okay, I hear the question. Very good, very good. I got the question. Let me respond on several levels. Let's first start with lahavdil, a contemporary example. If you've seen The Matrix, it's the blue pill or the red pill. Would you rather live in illusion, but everything is comfortable, but it's complete fake? Or would you rather live in reality and have a lot of pain? So it's a good question. So let me say this. Rabbi Hillel Parasher one very hot day in Russia. So there was no air conditioning. The only place to get relief from the heat was to go into these cool basements. Underground basements, cellars, and they would go there to cool off a bit. Okay. One day, Rabbi Hillel goes into one of these basements, and there are other people there, but it's so dark. Remember, there was no electricity. So it's totally pitch dark, pitch black. So he cries out, Rabbi Hillel. He says, it's so dark here. So one of the Chassidim sitting there says, don't worry, stay here a while, you'll get used to it. So he said, that's exactly what I'm worried about. I don't want to get used to it. So look, Beis Shammai said that it's more pleasant not to be born than to be born. Hillel said it's more pleasant to be born. The Alter Rebbe says, well, so why is the halacha not like Shammai? Because there the halacha is actually like Shammai. So why are we born? If the halacha is not better not, he says because it's more pleasant not to be born, but it's more meaningful to be born. No one ever suggested this life is going to be easy. So the question about awareness. So first of all, awareness is a level of avodah. It's not just to make setting you up a life of misery. It's setting you up a life of clarity and truths. And truths, yes, come with a price. When you climb up on a mountain, you're going to see horizons that you never saw before. So you say, I'd rather live down on the ground in the valley, in the pit, because I won't see these horizons, so I won't long for them. I'd rather not have love in my life, because then I won't have pain. I won't have longing. So with the word misery, I would replace with longing, with thirst. You're only thirsty when you recognize the truth of something. So yes, you could say, once I see it, I'd rather go back to a place where I wouldn't feel thirsty. I want to go back into the cellar where it doesn't feel dark. I feel the darkness is fine with me. That's number one. Number two, you haven't finished the subject. The Maimorim we're going to talk about, this Maimor and the Maimorim, this is based on the Tzemach Tzedek, talk about that also in Zman HaGolus, even now, there are many ways to quench this thirst. That's why we have Torah, and we have davening, and we have Gemilas Chasodim, and mitzvahs. Torah and mitzvahs is the way that we quench this thirst to some extent in this world. Now, the Asad Love, like anything, obviously will be the complete picture. But this does not mean that till then, we don't have any simcha. The same Rebbes that talk about this Chelas Ava, and they, I'm sure, experienced it, and they cried over it. The Rebbe Rashab cried when he was a 5-year-old child, why he can't see godliness. The Rebbe would cry for Mashiach and Gula like a child. At the same time, look at the smile on their faces. The Ivdu Hashem b'simcha. So you have to look at the whole picture. How do they have simcha when they have so much thirst, longing, and aching? Because they would never call it misery. They would call it Ein lehem menucha be'elam haza be'elam haba. They have no peace. They're not in their comfort zones. They're restless. Restlessness should not be confused with depression and anxiety. It's the sign of a person who's aware, seeking, and never stops seeking. That's one of the most beautiful things about the human being. So that's how I would contextualize this. Another thing I want to just say, the point of this Maimor is not, the goal is not Chelas Ava. The goal is recognition of God. The Mela, once you recognize the truth of godliness, then it causes this state. The goal is not an end to have Chelas Ava. Chelas Ava is actually a symptom of true love of godliness. So when you look at it that way, it's not, that's the purpose. That's the part of the growth, leads us to a place like that. And obviously when you're thirsting, you're going to do something about it. You're not going to sit on your, we won't use any expletives. You're not just going to sit and do nothing. You're going to be motivated. And my final thing, I want to say the story with the Rebbe Rashab. There was a chassid went into the Rebbe Rashab. He had some real problem. Rebbe Rashab says, I cannot help you. He leaves the Yechidus. He then goes out, he's crying. The Razah, the Rebbe Rashab's older brother, sees him crying. He says, why are you crying? He says, I went to the Rebbe. The Rebbe said, I can't help you. The Razah heard that. He went into his brother, his younger brother, the Rebbe Rashab, and says, you're a Rebbe. You're not here to tell people you can't help them. The reason you're a Rebbe is because you could help them. So the Razah, and he tells him what happened out there. I met the man, he's crying. How could you just tell him you can't help him? So he says, send them back in. He came back into the Rebbe Rashab. Rebbe Rashab helped him. We don't know the details. Gave him advice, suggestions. So later the Chassidim or I don't know if the Rebbe Rashab said it or the Chassidim explained what's going on here. Why the Rebbe Rashab had to have all this happen. He could have helped in the first place. So the Rebbe Rashab, I think, answered that no, he needed to want it more. He needed to have much more, and I didn't see that he was ready yet for that. In other words, if I would have helped him, it would have been me helping him. It wouldn't have been sustainable because it wasn't coming. Yes, he was desperate and crying, but when he went out to cry and saw how helpless it is, that created and opened up channels of deeper brachas. I was able to give him the brachas and the help that he needed. So there are times that we need that. That's just a final point in this context.
Very helpful. Thank you. That was a wonderful, consolidation of the issues. Thank you. Synthesis. Thank you.
This is powerful, the way that you explained it. Powerful, amazing.
Yeah.
I agree.
That's how we have to see Golus. Look, last night was a tragedy. I can't tell you how many messages I'm receiving. What should be our attitude? Look, a tragedy is a tragedy. God forbid, the day of Lag BaOmer, the day a man, Rashbi, people came to celebrate a person who brought healing to the world. That was his thing. It says after he came out of the cave, the 13th year, he was brought healing. Whatever he saw that was broken, was sick, he fixed, he healed. So on that day, this should happen. I mean, it's quite, so yes, we grieve, we cry, but at the same time, we have to remember, you don't want grieving to be an end in itself. Grieving is acknowledgement of the tragedy. It's also the unfathomable silence that we have, because what are you supposed to say? There's no words. What am I going to say? To explain it? It's ridiculous. You can't explain it. But at the same time, the healthy approach is you take the grief, like the Chayla Sava, and say, okay, what am I going to do about it? That was what the Rebbe taught us. What am I going to do about it? Yes, we could sit here and philosophize for hours. Why did it happen? What's going on here? On day, like, didn't we have enough? We need more. Why does Mashiach come already? We can go on and on. But if it doesn't lead to being a catalyst for action, there's something missing. Now, of course, when you grieve and you're sitting Shiva, that's what you're supposed to be doing. But we're talking about ultimately, it's supposed to lead us to do something. We're not going to have an answer. All the tragedies, we go find an answer, there's no answer. But you could do something about it and turn it into a positive force. And if not, what happens is the grief just becomes a debilitating and demoralizing experience. Another tragedy, and then we'll forget about it. And then that's that, because we forget about it. That's why the tragedy is not a tragedy. So no, we don't forget about it. We translate it into something so positive that what we remember is the positive things that came out of it. That still does not fill the vacuum of those lives lost and their families. And under these type of circumstances, I mean, COVID is COVID. One second, let me just finish. So I think, I'm just saying, I'm trying to translate what we're learning here. So yes, you say, I'd rather not hear the news. Okay, so you're totally not aware, so you don't even know. Or you hear the news and then you're just completely devastated. And then there's step 3. You're aware of it and it causes great grief and sadness. But at the same time, something comes of it that creates something greater. And then the hope is that finally that will tip the scale and bring Mashiach. And you have overall, and all these tzaddis will be over with. And we'll have only positive. This is where we are. This is the responsibility we have that we have to teach ourselves and our children. What are we going to do about this? How are you going to become a better person, a greater person? And how we should honor these souls. We have to honor them. Like the Rebbe said once about that they want to say by the Seder, you should leave an empty chair for the Holocaust, for those that were lost in the Holocaust. And the Rebbe said, why are you leaving an empty chair? Fill the chair with another person. Bring in a person who's never been at a Seder or someone who has been. An empty chair reminds you of the vacuum, of the missing. The extra chair says, not only is it missing, but the missing caused me to bring another Jew, because we have to fill and compensate for all those Jews that are not here to Prava Seder. You want to honor the 6 million? Do 6 million more mitzvahs. Do what they would have done and the families they would have brought into the world. What would the world be like today if those 6 million Jews had lived? They would have grandchildren and great-grandchildren. We'd have tens and tens of millions of more people, more mitzvahs and Torah. That's what we need to be doing. You see, that's where you take the grief and you turn it into a springboard for growth.
Well said. I think your point about sorry, please go ahead, Rabbi Teichel. I apologize. Go ahead.
Thank you. Reb Simon, I heard, I don't know if it's reliable, that 41 years ago, there was also a tragic situation in Miron.
Hebron,
I don't know if it was in this magnitude. And the Rebbe was asked, what should they do now?
Yeah, it was like they wanted. They thought of canceling the parades of Lag Baimer and the events, and the Rebbe said, "Beferish not."
The Rebbe said no, and he said, "Ma'avirin esameis milifnei hakalo." Right. You have to continue the happiness. Yeah, like you explained it.
Yeah.
I think you're just back to the mimer. It's not. You spoke very well. It was very helpful, frankly. What should be our attitude? We got something special that a lot of people texting you didn't get yet. But so thank you. But bringing this back to the mimer, I think when you said that this choilus ava, it's not the end. Of course, the end is to bring Elokus into our lives, into the world. But you said what the love sickness creates is a restlessness. I thought that was a really great word, because that restlessness, by definition, should spur one onto action, and that's what it means to lead a good life and a meaningful life. To use your phraseology. Is that not just to sit and be miserable, or to, God forbid, go down a bad derech, but that these contemplations should lead us to behave properly, to do good deeds, to bring a locus into this world. So it spurs to action, and I think that's a good constructive response to my question about, doesn't this just cause alienation? No, it causes restlessness that should spur one to do things that would bring more locus into our lives, and that would help at least begin to quench that thirst, or begin to heal that love sickness, I guess.
Yeah, correct. Totally agree.
Thank you very much. It was a great shiur. Thank you so much.
Sure.
I would like to ask you to pray for the quick health and recovery of Yosef Azriel Ben Chaya Michal, who is very seriously in hospital. And I'm sure
to this tragedy, due to this event?
Excuse me?
Due to the events in Miron?
That's as a result of what happened in Miron, yeah. Yosef Azriel.
Yosef Azriel Ben
Chaya Michal. I wrote it
Azriel Ben Chaya Michal, a complete and speedy.
He put it in the chat.
I put it in the chat.
Oh, okay.
I put it in the chat. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yosef Azriel Ben Chaya Michal should have a complete refuah shlema, b'karev, speedy in all possible ways, and everybody who needs a refuah shlema, and all of us who are. It's interesting. This piece we just learned.
As far as Talucha, the celebration was, they made the Talucha, no music, no parties, just the Talucha, and they said the Psukim and Tehillim.
Yeah, I know yesterday was a big debate. We had this Hatzolathon, and I was on it, and they were debating, should they cancel it? Should they not? What should they do? The whole thing was built around music and around... So
you do what you have to do.
I thought that
What? Sorry. I put the wrong speaker on. I was going to say, I thought that Avraham Fried, who's saying you could see he was so consternated and so conflicted about how to handle it. He was very upset about it, and he understood that the whole Jewish world is upset about it, and yet he's supposed to come and bring, simcha and chesed, and he said, no, what we should do is we need to bring happiness in this moment, and he said it better than I don't remember how he said it, but it was very difficult for him to get off the dime, to move off that point of consternation, and then he went and did his job, but he did it with love for the neshamas that passed. And in other words, it was Davka. Instead of getting depressed, we have to somehow find something positive that we can. He said it better than I did, but it was, I don't know if you saw him perform, but it was very touching because he pushed past the pain to do his job, and he made it. He did it in a respectful way. I was wondering myself, how are all these entertainers going to pull this off? How anybody who's connected, how are they going to pull it off? And I thought he did just an incredible job. He actually turned the pain into a greater energy to do his job. It was unbelievable. Maybe that's a part of what the issue here is with Cholis Ava, just like you're saying, turn it into some positive action.
Right.
Can't imagine what my son is going to say when he speaks in the shul tomorrow. I just can't even imagine. I can't get it out of my heart, this whole business.
I think that the Rebbe would say very strongly to increase everything with music and with everything. I remember a funeral that happened in front of 770. The Rebbe's face was grieving. You saw it in such a painful way. And a few hours later, it was the middle of the week, there was a Verbringen, and the Rebbe was in such a happiness and demanding this happiness. So Simon should find the right words to explain it. But I think that what the Rebbe wanted, it should be the simcha and the full measure with music and with everything. This is what I think.
And they canceled everything in Borough Park in Williamsburg, I heard.
I don't know. I think that this is not what the Rebbe wants.
I wonder if there's a way, I don't know, Rabbi Jacobson can think about it and give it over later, but how would we explain this this push to go the other direction to happiness, like the Rabbi did after this Levaya, to the uninitiated, to the people who would not know? I mean, lahavdil, like if I were coming in from the outside, what is with these Yidden? Israel just suffered the worst peacetime tragedy in its history. That's what they're saying now. At least 45 neshamas were histalku in this event, not to mention scores of injured. And yet now we've got Chassidim who are somehow are pushing past it, and they can sing and they can be happy on Lag BaOmer. I wonder how does one begin to explain this to the outside world? There's a bunch of crazy Jews. What's going on with them? Do they not feel the pain? And the point is, no, we feel the pain, but we have a mission. I don't know how you put that into words to someone who doesn't get it.
The same way you put it into words, how after 6 million Jews, a third of our people were killed, we went and built our lives and didn't just collapse and destroy ourselves. Yeah, the non-Jewish world can learn from it, because when they deal with recovery and trauma, they can learn a lot from the Jews. We suffered more than anyone. You think we're oblivious to suffering? I know many people on the outside that actually say the opposite of Jews. They say, why are you so obsessed with the Holocaust? Move on. So I don't know if we have to live by example and explain it in that context. We don't ignore grief and tragedy. If anybody suffered, we suffered more than anyone. We love our children, we love our families, but we learned how to healthily grow through it. And it's not about denial, it's about growth. And yes, it needs words, by all means. I'm not suggesting otherwise, but I just don't like to be put on the defensive. When people say that to me, I say, 1 second here, what do you think? We forgot that we lost our husbands and wives and children and grandchildren and parents and grandparents of the Holocaust. What do did you suffer? So we learn from our suffering. So, I mean, I'm just saying that internally.
Yes.
But the point being, obviously we need to explain. We also have to explain it to ourselves in that way.
Yeah, that was helpful. Anyways, everyone should get a nechama from Shabbos and find some closure. And thanks to Rabbi Jacobson for giving us some.
By the way, Yitzhak, did you?
insight.
I spoke about it yesterday. I was there. I spoke a little after Avram Fried sang.
I haven't gotten to it. I had to pause the screen. It's a long story, but no, I didn't listen to what you said. I still have it on the screen. Anybody, by the way, can go back and the Hatzalathon is recorded. So yes, I know you spoke. I didn't get to see it yet, and I'll go check it out. Bli neder.
Yeah, I actually spoke to Avram Fried right before he went on. We were talking about it.
Wow. Did I pick up on it correctly? He was really shaken by it.
Yeah,
everybody
there was. It was very conflicting because it was not just, it was like a major music event. They had all the biggest singers. So
in the whole Jewish
people
world,
said you have to cancel it. Listen, the news came here around 5:45, 6 o'clock in the evening, something like that. When did it happen? What time?
You're right, around then.
Yeah,
right.
About 1 o'clock at night in Israel.
So it was around 6 o'clock here. It was literally an hour before the event began. The event had begun already for children. It was literally an hour. So I remember we were speaking and everyone was so confused. What do you tell everybody? Just cancel the whole thing? So maybe, I'll tell you the truth. The only regret I have, I should have probably pushed them that maybe I should have opened up the whole program saying we heard about the events and we're thinking about it, and to put it in context, to explain at least why we're continuing the program. But fine, you know what? We all were, okay, it is what it is. Terrible. Do they even know what happened exactly?
Yeah,
I stampede. What happened exactly?
Well, there's a narrow walkway up there, basically a channel for people to move from point A to point B, and it's enclosed. It's got walls to the side. It's almost like lahavdil, God forbid, like herding cattle into a chute, and it's a maybe 15, 20 foot wide chute. But you're putting thousands of people through the chute at the same time. And the floor of this passage of this walkway was apparently, or at least portions of it were metal. I don't know how that can be, but you imagine like when you're walking on the street and they're fixing the sidewalk of the street, they put plates of metal on top of the hole. That was described as the flooring was metal, and some people began to slip. And this was going apparently downhill, uphill or downhill, downhill. So when people fell on when they slipped, then the people behind them would fall, and then it caused a cascade of people falling on top of each other. And then there was a stampede. When people started falling, people were getting crushed. There was people getting even more scared. So it was like a domino effect, and there was basically people got crushed to death. People were stepping on top of people. They couldn't breathe. They were squeezed. Imagine like at 770, like I was there with the Kinos Shluchim, and they have it Kabbalah Shabbos on Erev Shabbos, and you have more people you can possibly fit into 770, and it's like a wave of people. Like you can't move. You're moving like a wave of people. This was like
this
10
happened
times
every Shabbos.
Right. Well, apparently this was like 10 times or 20 times worse than that.
No, I understand. Okay, well.
Yeah.
Listen, I was there a few years ago on Lag B'Omer, and it was the most frightening experience of my life. I thought for sure, I had one consolation. I thought for sure I'm going to die there, being by the Rashbi is something. It was something you can't imagine. And I guess after all the lockdowns, everybody was just let's get out of here, let's do something great, and everybody had that wild attitude, and it made it even worse. I have no words to express how it was when I was there. Anyway, everybody have a good Shabbos.
Okay, we should only hear good news, everybody.
Amen.
So we learned till the end of the paragraph on page